My sister returned home after 20 years with a shocking secret. A story for American viewers. Part 1. The Knock That Changed Everything. The rain hammered against the windows of the old Whitfield house on Maple Street in Portland, Maine, like 1,000 angry fists demanding entry. Detective Jack Whitfield sat alone in his late father's study, the amber glow of a single desk lamp cutting through the October darkness. When the knock came, 3 sharp raps, deliberate and unhurried, exactly the way his mother used to summon them to dinner when they were children. Jack's hand froze over the cold coffee cup he'd been nursing for 3 hours. Nobody knocked like that anymore. Nobody could knock like that anymore. He rose slowly, his 42-year-old knees protesting the sudden movement, and crossed the creaking hardwood floor of the Victorian home that had been in the Whitfield family since 1897. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel through time, lined with photographs of faces that no longer existed. His parents at their wedding in 1972, his brother Tommy's high school graduation in 1998, and there, in a silver frame that Jack hadn't touched in 2 decades, his sister Sarah at 16, her auburn hair catching the summer light of Cape Cod, her smile so full of promise it made his chest ache. The knock came again, 3 raps, patient, knowing. Jack's fingers found the deadbolt, cold and familiar. He turned it and pulled the heavy oak door inward, and the porch light fell upon a woman standing in the rain, water streaming from a black umbrella that shielded her face from the glow of the street lamp. She wore a charcoal coat that looked expensive, cut in a style he'd seen in Manhattan, not Maine. Her boots were Italian leather. Her hands, gripping the umbrella's handle, were manicured but trembling slightly. "Hello, Jackie," she said, and the voice, that voice, unchanged despite the passage of 20 years, still carrying the faint Boston accent their grandmother had tried to beat out of them, sent a chill down Jack's spine that had nothing to do with the October wind. "Sarah," he whispered, because it couldn't be anyone else, though every rational thought in his detective's brain screamed that it shouldn't be her. "Sarah, is that really—" She lowered the umbrella and the light caught her face. Jack felt the floor tilt beneath him. She was 51 years old now, but the woman before him looked barely 40, her skin smooth and unlined, her green eyes, the same startling green as their mother's, sharp and clear and alive in a way that made him think of wild things in the forest, creatures that survived by instinct alone. Her auburn hair was shorter now, styled in a sleek bob that framed her face with precision. But it was the scar that stopped his heart. A thin white line, barely visible, running from her left temple down to her jawline. A scar he'd given her himself when they were 10 and 8, playing with their father's old army knife in the backyard of this very house. He'd cried for 3 days. She'd laughed and told him chicks dig scars. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. "It's been a long drive from Boston, and I think we need to talk." Jack stepped aside, his mouth dry, his mind racing through 20 years of unanswered questions. Sarah had disappeared the summer of 2004, 2 weeks after her 31st birthday. She'd been living in Cambridge, working as a research assistant at MIT's Media Lab, dating a philosophy professor named David Chen. One Tuesday morning, she didn't show up for work. Her apartment was undisturbed. Her car was in its parking space. Her phone was found on her nightstand, fully charged. She had simply ceased to exist. The Portland Police Department had investigated for 6 months. The FBI had taken over for a year. Jack, then a rookie cop in the same department where their father had served 30 years, had spent every off-duty hour searching, questioning, following leads that went nowhere. Their mother, Eleanor, had died of a broken heart in 2010. At least that's what Jack believed, though the official cause was congestive heart failure. Their father, Thomas Whitfield Sr., had followed her in 2018, still leaving Sarah's bedroom exactly as she'd left it, still setting a place for her at Thanksgiving until the day he died. And now she stood in the foyer of their childhood home, shaking rain from her coat like a cat. And Jack felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a child. The peculiar terror of not knowing whether to embrace his sister or arrest her. "You look good, Jackie," she said, turning to face him. The foyer light was brighter now, and he could see things he hadn't noticed on the porch. The subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her left hand kept drifting toward her coat pocket, the exhaustion that lived in the corners of her eyes despite her youthful appearance. "You've got Dad's jawline. Mom would have been proud." "Where have you been, Sarah?" The question came out harsher than he intended. 20 years of grief and anger and desperate hope compressing into 5 sharp words. 20 years. 20 years and not a word. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Mom died thinking you were dead. Dad drank himself to sleep every night for a decade. And you just, what? You just walk back in like you went to the store for milk? Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those green eyes. Pain, or perhaps regret so deep it had become indistinguishable from resignation. She reached into her coat pocket, and Jack's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon. A Glock 19 he still carried even off-duty, even in his own home. "Easy, cowboy," she said, her voice carrying a hint of their old banter. She withdrew a leather wallet and flipped it open. "I'm not armed. Well, not with anything that would hurt you." Jack stared at the identification card she held out. Not a driver's license, not a passport. The seal at the top made his blood run cold. United States Department of Defense, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. "Dr. Sarah Whitfield," she said quietly. "Senior Project Director, Biological Systems Division. Clearance level, top secret, compartmentalized. And Jackie, I need you to sit down. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, and I need you to hear all of it before you call the Bureau, or the Portland PD, or anyone else." She looked toward the kitchen, where their mother had baked apple pies on Sunday afternoons, where their father had read the Portland Press-Herald every morning for 50 years. "Is the kitchen table still there?" she asked. "The oak one with the water stain where Tommy spilled grape juice in '95? "It's still there," Jack managed, his voice rough. "Good," Sarah said, and for the first time he heard something break in her composure, a tremor, slight but real. "Because I think better at that table. And what I have to tell you, Jackie, I need to tell someone before they erase me completely. I need someone to know." Part 2, The Kitchen Table Confession. The oak table did indeed still bear the purple ghost of Tommy's grape juice incident, though Jack had covered it with a Maine Maritime Museum placemat for the past decade. Sarah ran her fingers across the wood grain as she sat, her touch reverent, like a pilgrim at a shrine. "Do you remember what I was working on at MIT?" she asked. "Before I disappeared? Something about synthetic biology?" Jack sat across from her, his coffee cup refilled with whiskey from his father's old cabinet. He needed something stronger than caffeine for this conversation. Gene editing. You were excited about it. You said it was going to change medicine forever. It did change medicine, Sarah said. Just not the way anyone expected. The project I was on, it wasn't just academic research, Jackie. It was funded by DARPA. Had been since 1999. We were looking for ways to enhance human cellular regeneration, healing wounds faster, reversing aging at the genetic level. The kind of thing that sounds like science fiction until you realize the military applications. She paused, her fingers tracing the water stain beneath the placemat. I made a breakthrough in March of 2004. A serendipitous accident, really. I was working with a modified CRISPR sequence, trying to activate dormant regenerative genes in mice, when I contaminated a sample with a synthetic protein we developed for something else entirely. The mouse didn't just heal from the incision I'd made, it reversed. Its cells began reverting to a younger state. Biologically, it got younger. Jack felt the whiskey burn his throat. You're talking about the fountain of youth? Sarah, that's impossible? She smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's what I thought. So I replicated the experiment. Then I replicated it again. By June, I had 12 mice that were chronologically 3 years old, but biologically 6 months. By July, I was ready to report my findings to DARPA. She reached up and touched the scar on her face, the scar that should have faded, should have disappeared entirely if what she was saying was true. I didn't report it, Jackie. I was going to. I had the presentation ready. But 3 days before I was scheduled to brief the oversight committee, 2 men came to my apartment in Cambridge. Not DARPA. Something else. Something called the committee. They knew everything. They knew about the mice. They knew about the protein sequence. They knew I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. the night before, crying in my bathroom because I was terrified of what I'd discovered. Jack's detective instincts, dulled by shock but still functional, prickled to attention. How could they know that? Because they'd been watching me for years, Jackie, since I was an undergrad at Stanford. They recruit people like me, young, brilliant, idealistic, working on cutting-edge science. They let us think we're doing independent research. They fund us through shell companies and academic grants. And when we discover something truly world-changing, something that could upend the balance of power, they take it. And they take us. Sarah stood abruptly and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the rain-soaked backyard where they'd built snowmen and fought with water balloons and buried their childhood pets. They gave me a choice, Jackie. The kind of choice that isn't really a choice at all. I could come with them quietly, continue my research under their supervision, and my family would be safe. Or I could refuse, and they'd make sure the research died with me. And probably take you and Tommy and Mom and Dad as collateral damage, just to be thorough. Jack felt his hands curl into fists. Who are these people? The government? Some corporate? I don't know who they are. Not really. I know they have people in DARPA, in the CIA, in Congress, in Silicon Valley. I know they've been operating since at least the 1950s, maybe longer. I know they have facilities, real ones, not conspiracy theory bunkers, hidden in plain sight, office buildings in Arlington, research parks in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, a converted hospital in rural Montana. She turned back to face him, and the kitchen light fell fully upon her face, and Jack saw what he'd missed before, the subtle wrongness of her youth, the way her 51 years of life experience seemed to peer out from a face that hadn't aged past 35. I've been working for them for 20 years, Jackie, in exchange for my family's safety, in exchange for the illusion that I'd simply vanished, become another statistic in America's missing persons files. I've developed things that would make your blood run cold. Regenerative therapies that can keep a soldier fighting after catastrophic injury. Neurochemical enhancements that eliminate fear and empathy. And the original discovery, the cellular regression therapy. I've refined it to the point where we can biologically de-age a human subject by approximately 15 years, with full memory and cognitive function intact. She touched her face again. I'm 51 years old, Jackie. Biologically, I'm 36. I've undergone the procedure twice. The first time was involuntary. They wanted to see if it worked on humans, and I was the most convenient test subject. The second time was 5 years ago. They wanted to see if the effects were repeatable. Jack felt the room spin. He thought of his mother wasting away in a hospital bed in 2010, her last words a whispered, "Sarah?" He thought of his father sitting in this very kitchen at 2 a.m., a bottle of Jim Beam and a photograph of his daughter, his only companions. He thought of Tommy, who'd moved to Seattle and barely spoke to the family anymore, who'd sent a Christmas card every year addressed only to Jack, as if acknowledging their parents' existence would require acknowledging their sister's absence. "Why now?" he managed. "Why come back now after 20 years?" Sarah's composure cracked completely. She sank back into the chair, her hands shaking violently now, and Jack saw that the manicured nails were bitten to the quick, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Because they're going to kill me, Jackie. Or worse. They're going to make me disappear again. But this time there won't be any coming back. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Something that has nothing to do with my research, but everything to do with why the committee exists in the first place." She reached into her coat again, and this time Jack didn't reach for his weapon. She withdrew a small USB drive, black and unmarked, and set it on the table between them like an offering. Or a confession. "Do you remember the anthrax attacks? 2001? The letters sent to Senators Daschle and Leahy?" "Of course," Jack said. "I was a rookie, but I remember the fear. The whole country was terrified." The FBI blamed Bruce Ivins, the scientist at Fort Detrick. He killed himself in 2008, case closed. But Jackie... Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Ivins didn't do it. He was a patsy. The anthrax was engineered in a committee facility in Frederick, Maryland. I found the records. I found the signed orders. I found the communications between committee members and someone in the vice president's office, dated September 10th, 2001. Jack felt the whiskey turn to ice in his stomach. You're saying 9/11 and the anthrax attacks were..." "I'm saying the committee has been shaping American history from the shadows for 70 years, Jackie. I'm saying they killed Kennedy because he was going to expose them. I'm saying they manufactured the Gulf of Tonkin incident to escalate Vietnam. I'm saying they let COVID-19 spread in 2020 because the chaos served their interests in ways I still don't fully understand. And I'm saying that on September 11th, 2001, they knew the attacks were coming. They let them happen. And then they used the anthrax to push the Patriot Act through Congress, to create the Department of Homeland Security to build the surveillance state they'd been planning since the Cold War. She pushed the USB drive toward him. Everything is on there. Financial records, communications, video footage, the names of committee members, some of whom you've voted for, Jackie. Some of whom you've shaken hands with at campaign rallies in Portland. Senators, congressmen, CEOs of companies whose products are in your refrigerator right now. Jack stared at the USB drive. It looked so small, so innocuous, like something you'd buy at Best Buy to store vacation photos. Why me? He asked. Why not go to the New York Times, the Washington Post? Why not WikiLeaks or some? Because the committee owns the media, Jackie. They own the publishers. They own the tech platforms. I've tried, God help me, I've tried to leak this information 3 times in the past 5 years. The first journalist I contacted died in a car accident 2 days later. The second one was arrested for child pornography, fabricated, but convincing enough to destroy his credibility. The third one simply vanished, and I don't know if he's dead or if they've recruited him. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her skin warm and alive and real in a way that made his eyes sting with tears he hadn't allowed himself since his mother's funeral. You're the only person I can trust, Jackie. Not because you're my brother, but because you're a good cop. Because Dad raised you to believe that the badge means something, that truth matters, that the system can work if enough good people fight for it. And because, she hesitated, her voice breaking, because if they kill me tomorrow, I need someone to know that I didn't abandon you, that I didn't abandon Mom and Dad, that I spent 20 years in a cage made of secrets, trying to find a way back to this kitchen table, to this water stain, to you. Part 3, The Night of Reckoning. They talked until 3 a.m., Sarah spinning a tale that sounded like the plot of a Tom Clancy novel, but carried the weight of lived experience in every detail. She told him about the facility in Montana, disguised as a pharmaceutical research campus, where she'd spent her first 5 years in effective captivity. She told him about the training, because brilliant scientists weren't enough. The committee wanted operatives who could blend in anywhere, who could kill with their bare hands, who could seduce or blackmail or disappear at a moment's notice. I can speak 6 languages fluently, she said, as casually as if discussing her favorite books. I can disassemble and reassemble a Glock blindfolded. I can kill a man with a credit card. They made sure of that. They wanted to own every part of me, Jackie. My mind, my body, my skills. The only thing they couldn't take was my memory of this house, of Mom's apple pie, of you teaching me to ride a bike on Elm Street and me skinning my knee, and you carrying me home even though I was heavier than you and you dropped us both in the Whitfield's hydrangea bushes. Jack laughed despite himself, the sound strange and rusty in his throat. You bled all over Mrs. Whitfield's prize flowers. She threatened to sue Mom. Mrs. Whitfield was a battle axe, Sarah agreed, smiling for the first time. And in that smile, Jack saw his sister, not the DARPA scientist, not the prisoner of some shadowy conspiracy, but the girl who'd read him The Hobbit by flashlight when he was afraid of thunderstorms, who'd defended him from bullies at Lincoln Middle School, who'd cried harder than anyone at his police academy graduation. What's the plan? He asked. You have a plan, right? You didn't just drive up from Boston without... I have a plan, she confirmed. It's not a good plan. It's probably a suicidal plan, but it's the only one I've got. She outlined it in terse military precision. The USB drive contained enough evidence to expose 3 senior committee members, 1 senator, 1 four-star general, and 1 tech billionaire whose social media platform had shaped 2 presidential elections. If Jack could get the data to Assistant Director Carmen Ruiz at the FBI's Boston field office, a woman Sarah had identified through years of careful observation as one of the few high-ranking law enforcement officials not compromised by the committee, they might be able to act before the committee could suppress the information. Might, Jack repeated. That's not very reassuring. It's the best odds I've had in 20 years, Sarah said. The problem is getting to Boston without being intercepted. They know I'm gone by now. I disabled my tracking implant. Yes, they put a tracking implant in my neck because of course they did. But they'll have people watching the highways, the train stations, the airports. They'll be monitoring your phone, your email, your credit cards. They probably already know I'm here. As if summoned by her words, Jack's phone buzzed on the table. They both froze. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Local Maine area code. Don't answer, Sarah whispered. Jack stared at the phone. 20 years as a cop had taught him that unknown numbers at 3 a.m. were never good news. But something made him reach for it. Instinct, or habit, or the same stubborn refusal to back down that had made him a detective instead of taking the safe route to sergeant and lieutenant and eventual retirement with a pension. Detective Whitfield, he answered, putting it on speaker. Jack. The voice was male, smooth, educated, with the faint hint of a Virginia drawl that suggested old money and older secrets. My name is Mr. Black. I'm a friend of your sister's. I understand she's visiting you tonight. I'd like to speak with her, if you don't mind. Sarah's face went pale. She mouthed a single word. Run. I don't know what you're talking about, Jack said, his cop voice automatic, trained through 1,000 interrogations. My sister's been missing for 20 years. If you have information about her whereabouts, I'd suggest you contact the Portland Police Department's cold case unit. They open at 8 a.m. Mr. Black laughed, a sound like velvet over steel. Very good, detective. Very professional. But let's not waste time with pretense. Sarah has something that belongs to us, a small storage device. I'm prepared to offer a trade, her life and yours, for the device and her voluntary return to our custody. She's valuable to us, Jack, more valuable than you can imagine. We don't want to kill her. We don't want to kill you, but we will, if necessary. We have before, many times. Jack looked at Sarah. She was shaking her head violently, her eyes wide with terror and something else, determination. She reached across the table and wrote on a napkin with a pen from her pocket. Backdode. Woods. Now. Give me a minute to think about it, Jack said into the phone. You have 30 seconds, Mr. Black replied pleasantly. 29, 28. Jack hung up. Backdoor, Woods, now. They moved as one, years of childhood games in these very woods giving them an instinctive coordination that needed no words. Sarah grabbed her coat and the USB drive. Jack snatched his keys, his wallet, and the Glock from his shoulder holster. They slipped through the kitchen, past the pantry where they'd hidden during hide-and-seek, through the mudroom where their mother had made them leave their snowy boots, and out into the darkness of the Maine forest that stretched behind the house for 2 miles before hitting Route 1. The rain had stopped. The moon emerged from behind breaking clouds, casting silver light through the bare branches of oak and maple. They ran, not toward the road, but deeper into the woods, following a trail that only Jack remembered. A deer path that led to an old logging road, that led to Henderson's Creek, that led eventually to the highway if you knew where to look. Behind them, lights flickered in the windows of the Whitfield house. Not the warm glow of the kitchen lamp, but the harsh white of tactical flashlights moving with professional precision through rooms that held 200 years of family memory. "They're already here," Sarah gasped, her expensive boots slipping on wet leaves. "Jackie, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have dragged you into—" "Shut up and run," Jack panted, because he was 42 and she was 51, and they were both too old for this. But adrenaline and terror and 20 years of waiting had given him a desperate energy that pushed him forward. "Left at the Big Pine. There's a storm drain under the highway. We used to—" "I remember," Sarah said, and somehow she was ahead of him now, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had been trained to survive, to escape, to endure. "Tommy dared us to crawl through it in '89. You got stuck, and I had to pull you out by your ankles." They reached the drain, a concrete pipe, half collapsed but still passable, that ran beneath Route 1 and emerged in a field on the other side. Jack could hear voices behind them now, professional and calm, coordinating a search pattern. He could see flashlight beams cutting through the trees. "Go," he urged, pushing Sarah toward the pipe. "I'll hold them off. I'm a cop. I can—" "You're a dead cop if you try," Sarah snapped, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "We go together, or we don't go at all. That's how this works, Jackie. That's how it's always worked." They crawled through the drain together, concrete scraping their knees, the smell of mildew and ancient rainwater filling their lungs. On the other side, they emerged into a soybean field, the harvested stalks creating a maze of shadows in the moonlight. A mile to the east, Jack could see the lights of the I-95 corridor, the endless river of trucks and travelers who had no idea that two desperate people were running for their lives in the field beside them. "My car," Sarah whispered. "I left it in the parking lot of the Dunkin' Donuts on Commercial Street. Keys are in a magnetic box under the rear bumper. If we can get there—" "Commercial Street is 2 miles, Jack said. "And they'll have it staked out. Not the car they know about." Sarah smiled, and in that smile, Jack saw the reckless girl who'd talked him into every bad decision of his childhood. "I bought it yesterday for cash from a guy in South Portland. Titles in the name of Eleanor Whitfield. Mom's name, Jackie. I thought if I made it this far, I'd want her with me somehow." They moved through the field, keeping low, using the harvested rows for cover. Twice, they heard helicopters overhead, searchlights sweeping the landscape with mechanical indifference. 3 times they had to freeze as vehicles passed on nearby roads. Dark SUVs with tinted windows, moving slowly, hunting. It took 40 minutes to reach Commercial Street. The Dunkin' Donuts was closed, its parking lot empty except for a single Toyota Camry, silver, utterly unremarkable, parked beneath a broken street lamp. Sarah retrieved the keys from beneath the bumper with trembling hands. "Get in," she said. "Drive north. There's a cabin in Rangeley, owned by a man who doesn't exist, paid for with money that doesn't exist. We can regroup there, contact Ruiz, figure out our next move." Jack slid behind the wheel, his detective's mind automatically noting details. The car smelled of pine air freshener and old coffee. The gas tank was 3/4 full. The registration in the glove box was indeed made out to Eleanor Whitfield. 14 Maple Street, Portland, Maine. A small rebellion that made Jack's eyes sting with tears he couldn't afford to shed. "Sarah," he said as he pulled onto the road, heading north toward the mountains. "That USB drive, the evidence, is it enough? Really enough?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the darkness roll past the window. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than he'd ever heard it. The voice of the girl who'd once believed that science could save the world, before she'd learned that the world didn't want to be saved. "It's enough to expose 3 of them," she said. 3 out of hundreds. "It's enough to start a fire, Jackie. Whether that fire burns down the whole rotten structure or just gets us killed, I don't know. I've been wrong before. I've been wrong about so many things." She turned to look at him, and in the dashboard light, Jack saw his sister, not the ageless DARPA scientist, not the conspiracy theorist with a USB full of secrets, but the woman who had once been his best friend, his protector, his hero. "But I was right about one thing," she continued. "I was right to come home. Even if they kill me tomorrow, even if this all ends in a ditch somewhere with a bullet in my head and a cover story in the Portland Press Herald about a tragic murder-suicide, I was right to see you one more time, to sit at that kitchen table, to remember who I was before they made me into what I am." Jack reached across the center console and took her hand, feeling the bitten nails and the trembling fingers and the warmth of skin that was somehow, impossibly, both 51 and 36 years old. "We're going to make it," he said, not knowing if he believed it, but knowing that he had to say it, that some promises were worth making even if they couldn't be kept. "We're going to get to Rangeley. We're going to contact Ruiz. And we're going to burn their whole rotten structure down, Sarah. For Mom. For Dad. For every person who ever disappeared into one of their facilities, who ever had their life stolen by people who think they're gods." Sarah squeezed his hand, and for a moment the Camry was a time machine, and they were 10 and 8 again, running through the woods behind the house on Maple Street, laughing and breathless and free, with nothing ahead of them but summer and possibility and the simple, profound joy of being alive, together, in a world that hadn't yet shown them its darkness. Part 4. The Fire That Follows. They reached the cabin in Rangeley at dawn, the sky bleeding pink and gold over the western mountains of Maine. It was a simple place, 1 room, wood stove, no electricity, water from a hand pump, the kind of place their grandfather had hunted from in the 1960s before the world got complicated. Sarah collapsed onto the single bed, her youthful face finally showing its true exhaustion, the decades of tension and fear catching up with her in a rush. Jack stood guard at the window, his Glock in hand, watching the dirt road that led to the cabin through a pair of binoculars he'd found in the glove box. "Sleep," he told her. "I'll watch." "You need sleep too," she mumbled, already half gone. "I'm younger than you," he reminded her. "Biologically, at least. Now sleep, old lady." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass and healing wounds, and was asleep in seconds. Jack watched the road. He thought about calling Tommy in Seattle, about warning him, about telling his brother that their sister was alive and they were in trouble, and maybe, just maybe, they were going to need family one more time. But Sarah had been right. The phones were compromised. Any contact could be a death sentence. At noon, Sarah woke, and they used a satellite phone she'd cached in the cabin, a burner, untraceable, or so she hoped, to call Assistant Director Carmen Ruiz in Boston. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Jack didn't hear Sarah's side. But he watched her face shift from hope to frustration to something that looked like cautious optimism. "She'll meet us," Sarah said, hanging up. "Tomorrow. A parking garage in Augusta. She wants the USB drive. She wants me to testify before a federal grand jury. She says she has a team she trusts, people who've been working on committee-related cases for years without knowing what they were really investigating." "Do you trust her?" Jack asked. "I trust that she hates them more than she fears them," Sarah said. "Her brother was a journalist. He died in a car accident in 2015. She thinks it was an accident. I know it wasn't." They spent the day preparing. Sarah showed Jack how to use the satellite phone's emergency beacon. She taught him a recognition code, a series of phrases that would identify friendly contacts. She made him memorize the names of 3 lawyers in Washington, D.C., who specialized in cases involving government corruption and whistleblower protection. "If something happens to me," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words, "you take the USB drive. You go to Ruiz. You don't stop. You don't look back. You finish this, Jackie. For me. For all of us." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Jack said, but they both knew he was making a promise he couldn't keep. They left for Augusta at 4 a.m. the next morning, driving through darkness that felt alive with threat. Every set of headlights behind them was a potential tail. Every empty road was a potential ambush. Jack's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, and Sarah sat beside him with her eyes closed, breathing in a pattern she'd learned somewhere in her 20 years of captivity, a meditation technique, she said, that let you rest while remaining ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. The parking garage in Augusta was a concrete monstrosity near the state capitol, 5 levels of gray silence at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. Jack parked on the 3rd level, near the elevator, exactly as Ruiz had instructed. They waited. At 6:17, a black sedan pulled into the space beside them. A woman emerged, late 50s, Latina, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades commanding respect in rooms full of powerful men. She wore a pantsuit and sensible shoes, and her eyes swept the garage with the practiced assessment of someone who had survived more dangerous meetings than this. "Dr. Whitfield," she said, extending her hand to Sarah. "Detective Whitfield, I'm Carmen Ruiz. Thank you for trusting me." Sarah handed over the USB drive without ceremony. "There's a password. It's Maple Street, 1972, my parents' wedding date. Everything is organized by date, by individual, by crime. There's enough there to arrest Senator Hawthorne, General Morrison, and David Kincaid. But that's just the beginning. The real prize is the network map. Every committee member I've been able to identify in 20 years. Hundreds of names, thousands of connections." Ruiz took the drive with reverent care, slipping it into her jacket pocket. "My team is standing by. We'll have these 3 in custody within the hour. The network map, that will take longer, but we'll work through it, methodically, carefully, the way these bastards never expected anyone to work." She looked at Jack, then back at Sarah. "You understand what happens next? They'll come for you, both of you. They'll use every resource they have. You'll need to disappear, at least until the trials are over. I can help with that. New identities, safe houses. It's not freedom, not really, but it's life. And it's more than they've given their other victims." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "I've been disappearing for 20 years, Assistant Director. I'm good at it. And you, Detective?" Ruiz turned to Jack. your career, your home, your life in Portland, it's over, at least for now. Are you prepared for that? Jack thought of the house on Maple Street, now probably searched and surveilled. He thought of his badge, his pension, his carefully constructed life of routine and order. He thought of his brother in Seattle, who didn't even know their sister was alive, who might never know if the committee had their way. He thought of Sarah sitting across from him at the kitchen table with the water stain, telling him the truth for the first time in 20 years. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," he said. "I just didn't know it." Rui smiled, a rare expression that transformed her severe features. "Good. Then let's get you out of here. There's a safe house in Bar Harbor. From there we'll—" The sound came from above, a soft whoomp, like a heavy book dropped on carpet. Then another. Then the scream of tires on concrete and 3 black SUVs screeching onto the 3rd level from both ramps, blocking every exit. "Down!" Sarah screamed, and her training took over, her body moving with lethal grace as she pulled Jack behind a concrete pillar. Ruiz was already moving, her weapon drawn, her phone to her ear calling for backup that would never arrive in time. The SUVs disgorged men in tactical gear, no insignia, no identification, just black masks and black weapons and the professional economy of movement that marked them as committee operatives, not police, not military, but something worse. True believers in a cause that justified any atrocity. "Sarah Whitfield," a voice called through a megaphone, and Jack recognized it. Mr. Black, smooth and educated and utterly without mercy. "You know how this ends. Come quietly. Your brother lives. Resist, and we take the USB drive from your corpses. The choice is yours." Jack looked at Sarah. She was breathing hard, her eyes wild, but her hands were steady as she checked the magazine of a small pistol she'd produced from somewhere in her coat. A Sig Sauer, compact and deadly. "There's a service elevator," she whispered. "Behind us, 20 feet. It goes to the basement. From there, a tunnel to the street. I memorized the blueprints." "Ruiz?" Jack asked. "She's a big girl. She can take care of herself. We need to move. Now." They ran, bullets sparking against concrete where they'd stood seconds before. Jack felt something hot graze his shoulder, but adrenaline kept him moving, kept him following Sarah through the chaos of gunfire and shouting and the sickening thud of rounds finding flesh somewhere behind them. The service elevator was ancient, manual, the kind that required a key. Sarah produced one from her pocket, part of her endless preparation, her 20 years of planning for exactly this moment. The doors closed behind them as bullets hammered the metal, and they descended into darkness. "We're not going to make it to Bar Harbor," Jack said, pressing his hand against his shoulder, feeling blood warm and sticky against his palm. "No," Sarah agreed, "but we're going to make it somewhere. We're going to keep moving, keep fighting, keep surviving. Because that's what Whitfields do, Jackie. That's what we've always done." The elevator opened into a basement that smelled of oil and old water. Sarah led him through a tunnel that seemed to stretch for miles, emerging finally into the gray light of an Augusta morning, on a street that could have been anywhere in America, in a world that was suddenly larger and more dangerous and more alive than Jack had ever imagined. They ran. They would keep running. But for the first time in 20 years, they were running together towards something instead of away from it, carrying a truth that might change everything or might change nothing, but would at least be known. Behind them, sirens began to wail. Not the sirens of the committee's hunters, but the ordinary, beautiful sirens of police responding to shots fired, of a system that still functioned, however imperfectly, of a world where truth might still find its way to light. Closing note. My friends, if you've made it this far, thank you for staying with Jack and Sarah until the end. Stories like this remind us that the bonds of family can survive even the darkest secrets, the longest separations, the most powerful enemies. They remind us that truth matters, that courage matters, that the simple act of refusing to give up can be the most revolutionary thing we do. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people you've lost and found, about the secrets that shape our lives, about the strength it takes to come home after 20 years, then I hope you'll stay with this channel. We tell stories like this every week, stories of suspense, of heart, of the American experience in all its complexity and beauty. Hit that subscribe button. Join our community of story lovers. Leave a comment telling us about your own family, your own secrets, your own homecomings. And until next time, good luck out there. Keep fighting for the truth. And remember, no matter how long you've been gone, there's always a kitchen table waiting for you. Stay safe, stay human, and we'll see you in the next story. Subscribe.